So welcome back to Living Life on Purpose and this special edition of my show where I'm doing nonfiction authors today. And my final guest for today has a fascinating set of circumstances and a gripping book. I started reading her book and I was just like, wow, what a journey. So my next guest is Heidi Siefkas, and she'll again tell me if this is her pronunciation is right. She was originally happily married, a globe-trotting professional who seemed to have it all, until a tree limb in the Hudson River Valley struck her down, breaking her neck and leaving her unconscious. Her book is called When All Balls Drop. So welcome to the show today, Heidi.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I'm thrilled to share my story with you and your listeners, and kudos to being spot on the last name pronunciation. Siefkas is correct.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so when I heard, when I started reading your story, 2009, the tree falls down on you, it's like, oh my God, and how often can that happen? And it actually has happened here at the campus where I live, where people have been killed. And so since you're one of the few people I can actually ask this question of, did you hear that limb cracking nearby you, that all of a sudden there was a sound, or was it's one of those quirky things where it was silent and it was just on top of you?
I would have thought I would have heard something. I didn't hear, see, or feel a thing. From the moment I exited the building, at the time I was actually doing a domestic duty. I was taking out the trash, and then everything went blank. And other people had to put the pieces of the story together for me, because 5 days later I woke up in the ICU after spending those days unconscious.
I can't even imagine that journey, Heidi. And you're very graphic. I love how much your personality comes out in your book when you're talking about, that guy who was not real nice at the beginning, and how you got yourself moved out of ICU because you really didn't like him and the braces weren't right. And so, you're pretty snappy at the beginning of your book. So 2009. So that's 6 years later. So kind of let's talk about your journey pre-accident, and then we'll talk about post-accident. So what was pre-accident life look like when you had everything, globe-trotting, da-da-da? What was your kind of life like?
The description of pre-accident was a seemingly perfect life. I was a self-proclaimed superwoman juggling many balls, and we're talking an executive travel industry job in Berlin 1 week, LA the next, hobnobbing and rubbing elbows with people in the Playboy Mansion, and taking a red eye to Orlando for a travel expo the following day. Happily married to a Brazilian chef, living in South Florida, keeping up with the Joneses or the Juarezes with a larger house than necessarily two of us needed, and living a happy and healthy lifestyle, enjoying the sun, surf, and sand here. Then everything came to a screeching halt on one of my travels to the Hudson River Valley, which is in New York, about an hour and a half out of New York City. And so the title of the book, When All Balls Drop, comes from the fact that I, not effortlessly, but I was multitasking and keeping all these balls up in the air. Maybe not paying attention to everything and being mindful, but keeping that picture-perfect lifestyle. All balls drop topic comes from that circus act that I was performing, and the tree clobberates me on that normal fall day in Poughkeepsie, New York, was the first. And as it so happens, it was just one ball, or the first domino, that led to a complete, what I call a full-blown life catastrophe. Everything that I held dear that fall was lost.
Have you made meaning or sense of why that had to happen, or that it happened at all? Or is it just...
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it seemed as if I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and just everything started to collapse. My health was imperiled. There was no knowledge as to what full recovery would look like, if that was even possible. It was going to be a lengthy recovery. Because of that high-powered executive job, well, they forced me to resign. So my professional identity, my health is in jeopardy, and then when you need support the most, I found out that my husband had been living a double life for the last year. So we're talking every pillar of my persona had been knocked down, wiped out, and I was at my lowest point in my entire life.
So how did you pick yourself up, Heidi? And I think
that forced pause. Okay, you can't be doing 5 things at once. I had the time to actually reflect. There was no job to go to, meeting to go to, dinner to cook. I was forced to be immobile, at least from my torso, neck, and back, for nearly 5 months, and also recovering outside of where I called home. The accident was in New York. I lived in Florida. So I had a lot of time to think about the path that I was on. And I really came to the conclusion that I really had no control over that seemingly perfect life. And realistically, none of us really do. We can't control our DNA or a boss's mood or the infidelity of our significant other. But what I did have the power of was tapping into my perspective and how I could process this experience into whether it be an opportunity of growth, of wisdom, and what I found out is a happier, truer path than I was ever on.
Now, walk us through how your book is laid out and kind of its format so people can understand your book.
I typically describe it as an of the times book. It is not written in long chapters. It is in very short, down-to-earth vignettes. Originally, they started out as journal entries. And for the most part, it is chronological, except for a few flashbacks to fill in the details as I start the book with me in the ICU. And of course, I couldn't tell what had happened to me that day. I needed other people to fill in those pieces of the puzzle, and so I flash back to those elements as well as to components to introduce you to some of the characters or things that I had found out earlier that fall that led me to discover the infidelity of my husband. And although I talk about probably 3 of the most devastating losses that you can have in one's life that are simultaneously happening, there is a dose of just this sassy humor peppered throughout that gives you almost this addictive feeling that you want to turn the next page and see, oh my God, what else can happen to this girl? And,
right, and
how is she going to spin this?
There's a sassiness I just really liked.
And it's, I think in order to really understand the upside of losing everything, you have to have that humor peppered throughout, because as I was writing this, I was doing it for therapeutic journal entries myself. I never wrote it intending to release it to the world, but it took time, and ironically, living this life to the fullest and hiking in South America with a complete stranger, I shared my story, and she said, that would make a great book. So these sassy vignettes have turned into something that has been very well received. I feel so rewarded getting reviews from people that I don't know, whether it's online or in person, And I have to toot my own horn. It's actually right now transitioning to film. So when all balls drop,
it's a natural book for that.
Absolutely
natural. Well, Heidi, I'm so glad to have you on the show, and I'm also really glad that you're covered. And her book is When All Balls Drop. Where can people find your book, Heidi?
You can find my book in print and e-versions on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iBooks, as well as connect with me on my website, which is my full name, HeidiSiefkas.com.
Beautiful. Well, thanks for joining me today on Living Life on Purpose, Heidi.